last remaining territory on the planet that could have such a designation is Antarctica.
One of the things I find most striking is the presence of Antarctica on ancient maps, because we didn't discover it until 1820, and yet it's on maps drawn in the 1500s with great detail, which again were based on much older source maps that have now been lost to us.
Antarctica is the driest, coldest, and windiest continent on Earth. It is also the most inhabitable place in the world, being almost totally covered by an ice sheet that is up to 5 kilometers deep. It has no permanent inhabitants, and most of its interior has no life of any kind. Antarctica is a place that is already known to be full of mysteries and generates fear and amazement from the scientific community. However, recently, a drone flew over this ice landscape and discovered some of the most disturbing things that could ever cross the human mind. How far mysterious can a place like Antarctica be? Join us as we explore the discovery made in the ice wall of Antarctica and other shocking details. The mysterious place called Antarctica. Antarctica is like nowhere else on Earth. While there are other wild places, or ones that seem extreme, this is the only continent in the world where people have never permanently lived. In the interior of the continent, there is nothing to make a living from. No food, no shelter, no clothing, no fuel, no liquid water. Nothing but ice. Although people had long suspected there may be some kind of land at the bottom of the world like Antarctica, even the Greeks believed in Antarctica, saying, with the peculiar logic of philosophy, that there must be a far southern continent to balance out the land in the north. It was all a dream, as no one knew where it was, and it remained undiscovered for years. The first sighting of the continent's outermost islands in 1819 did little to stop the speculation of what might lie beyond, and the first serious attempts to penetrate its interior took place barely 100 years ago, in the heroic age of exploration by Scott, Amundsen, Shackleton, and the rest. Even now, although this land is bigger than Europe or the continental US, it has only 49 temporary bases. Most of them remain relatively inaccessible. In summers, there are perhaps 3,000 scientists on the ice, plus another 30,000 tourists who come in on short visits, usually by ship to the Western Peninsula. In winters, there can be just 1,000 people on the entire continent. The scale of the place is hard to understand. You see a mountain or an island that seems a few hours' walk away and decide to wander over and explore. 5 days later, you're still walking. The early explorers did this a lot. The problem is not just the size of the features, glaciers that make Alaska look small, mountains that dwarf the Alps, but also the absence of anything against which to judge them. There are no trees, or indeed plants of any kind, no land animals, nothing but glaciers, snowfields, and sepia-toned rocks. Recently, a drone flew over this ice landscape and discovered that while humans have only been visiting Antarctica for about 2 centuries, the atmospheric effects of their presence in other parts of the world can be detected in the ice that has built up from earlier centuries. It is well known that humans always leave their mark on the places they visit and sometimes inhabit. So in Antarctica, they have killed and contaminated wildlife. They have discharged their waste into the sea, and they have buried radioactive waste in the ice. Ships have polluted Antarctica's waters when they have sunk off its coastline. Aircraft and helicopters have also crashed onto its ice and been left where they fell. Entire bases have been abandoned, and their aesthetics have been scattered by the ferocious winds. Scientists have contaminated the environment with radioactive isotopes for their experiments and drilled their way down to lakes that have existed untouched beneath the ice cap for millennia. If a map could be drawn of human activity in Antarctica and its surrounding waters, over the last 200 years, few parts of the map would be blank and untouched, while the other is largely becoming unpleasant to the eyes. While Antarctica can't truthfully be described any longer as being pristine, its sheer size has ensured that the continent, along with its atmosphere and seas, remained relatively unspoiled in comparison to the rest of our world. The 1959 Antarctic Treaty has been fairly effective in restricting activities that would despoil the environment or decimate the wildlife. While some nations have made a good effort to clean up their bases, others continue to discharge waste into the ocean and in other ways neglect their responsibility to protect the environment. Rusting equipment and drums of oil can still be found around the bases of nations that shrink from the expense and effort of restoring their sites. So, it is debatable whether the Antarctic Treaty System is currently capable of ensuring that the protection of the Antarctic environment is taken seriously by all the nations that have bases there. Meanwhile, declaring Antarctica as a world park and placing it under an international governance regime that has environmental protection as its paramount objective could see Antarctica better protected. But it is the activities of humans far removed from Antarctica that are having the greatest impact on its environment. There are no immigration officers on hand to greet visitors to Antarctica, nor are there any police to enforce the environmental regulations designed to protect the environment and prevent interference with scientific research. Yet more than 1 million people have stepped ashore in the nearly 2 centuries since the American sealer John Davis became the first person to land on the Antarctic Peninsula in 1821. Each summer, some 40,000 tourists visit Antarctica and its adjacent islands, greatly outnumbering the annual influx of scientists. When a crowd of tourists walk thoughtlessly across sensitive moss beds, the areas can take years to recover. When they pilfer artifacts from the huts of early explorers or take fossils as souvenirs from the rocky beaches, they are lost forever. And when excited tourists push their way into a colony of penguins for a selfie, they risk destroying the unhatched eggs and disturbing the natural behavior of the penguins that scientists are anxious to study. On a far more serious level, tourist ships have occasionally come to grief and sunk, spewing oil into the freezing water where it can cover the space of the penguins and seals before being ingested by the adults and their young, as well as affecting marine life on the seafloor. The funnels of the tourist ships also pump their exhaust into the otherwise unpolluted Antarctic air. In the past, rubbish and sewage from tourist ships has been dumped into the sea, and the broken equipment of adventurers has been left abandoned on the ice. Apart from the environmental damage, the unintended effects of the tourist industry can frustrate the work of those scientists who are attempting to study the Antarctic free of the effects of human impact. On the other hand, many tourists become passionate advocates for Antarctica and can help shape public opinion in ways that promote the protection of the continent. Unregulated, there is little doubt that the booming tourist industry would have caused even greater damage to the environment and more disruption to scientific programs. However, the treaty signatories have introduced an increasingly restrictive code of conduct for tourist operators, with the industry embracing the restrictions as a way of ensuring their continued access. Despite the restrictions, it is inevitable that the increasing number of tourists will have a negative effect on the ecology of the places they visit, and that more tourist ships will run aground or sink in Antarctica's isolated and dangerous waters. While the tourist ships are mostly restricted to the waters off the Antarctic Peninsula, adventure tourists often head for other parts of the continent. The activities of these adventurers are more difficult to control. Some of them refuse to recognize the existence of any authority in Antarctica while still expecting to be rescued if they come to grief. They continue to be a burden on scientists if they arrive at their bases, sometimes unannounced, and expect to find food and shelter, or if they call for help after suffering a mishap. When these adventurers fail to operate under the guidelines established by the Antarctic Treaty signatories and the Antarctic Tourist Organization, they can have a damaging impact on the areas they visit. So many climbers have now ascended Mount Vinson that their abandoned equipment and stores must surely litter its heights in the same way that climbers have made Mount Everest into a rubbish dump. At the moment, this can't be prevented or punished, since no countries exercise sovereignty over Antarctica and no sanctions can be imposed when individuals or groups despoil the environment. Importantly, there is a large fear of the melting of the Antarctica ice cap. The potential melting of the Antarctic ice cap. There are fears by some scientists that the Antarctic ice cap will soon melt completely as a result of human activities. Some other scientists believe that this cannot happen because the Antarctic ice cap is up to 4 kilometers deep and contains sufficient water to cause the sea level to rise by 58 meters. Only about 10% of that rise would come from West Antarctica and the rest from East Antarctica. That being said, the Antarctic ice cap would take a long time to melt, if it ever does. With the limits of their knowledge about the complex interactions between the Antarctic atmosphere and the Southern Ocean, along with the ice shelves and glaciers, and with the consequent limits of their computer models, scientists can't say with any certainty how long it will take. Predictions depend upon a multitude of factors that are out of the control of humans, but some factors are within our control, particularly our greenhouse gas emissions. If nothing is done about the burning of fossil fuels and the discharge of greenhouse gases, the time frame for the melting will be much shorter than if the Earth's atmosphere was restored to the levels that prevailed a century ago. While initial estimates suggested that it could take up to several thousand years for Antarctica to become free of ice, more recent estimates have reduced the time frame to as little as 500 years. Well before that happens, there will be an increasingly calamitous rise in sea levels, reaching nearly 3 meters by the end of this century. Despite such dire possibilities, the much greater volume of ice in East Antarctica, combined with its intensely cold climate and protective winds, offers some chance of stemming the sea level rise before it overwhelms us. If nations can achieve a carbon-neutral world, or better still, a carbon-negative world, they might yet slow the melting of East Antarctica and over several centuries even restore the continent to its former state. The scientific consensus on the melting of Antarctica. The scientific consensus on the melting of Antarctica has changed radically in recent years. Previously, the measurements of sea ice, the amount of snowfall, the protective function of the cold circumpolar current, and the apparently unchanging ice shelves combined to suggest that Antarctica might be shielded from the worst effects of global warming and even be able to offset the dramatic changes being witnessed in the Arctic. That confidence gradually disappeared as scientists gained a better understanding of the ice shelves and the glaciers that feed them, as well as the workings of the ocean currents in the Southern Ocean. It is now clear that increased snowfall will be insufficient to outweigh the increased ice loss, as the collapsing ice shelves cause an acceleration in the movement of many of the glaciers and a consequent thinning of the ice sheet. As a result, the former equanimity among some scientists and policymakers has been replaced by a growing conviction that serious melting and rising sea levels will occur during the lifetimes of many people now living. The latest scientific modeling suggests there will be a rise of nearly 3 meters in sea levels by 2100, which will have catastrophic effects on low-lying coastal areas and many crowded cities. Moreover, there will be increasingly serious impacts on the world in the decades leading up to the end of this century. The big question facing humanity is whether a change in human behavior could slow down or even reverse this process. The answer to this crucial question may be different for East and West Antarctica. The quick collapse of some ice shelves in West Antarctica and the acceleration of their glaciers has caused glaciologists to suggest that the situation in West Antarctica may have reached a tipping point from which it will be difficult, if not impossible, to recover. Indeed, the scientific records from West Antarctica have revealed that since 1950, it has experienced a growing temperature increase per decade, making it one of the world's fastest warming places. The warmer air and water has been eating away at its ice shelves, which has recently caused some of them to suddenly collapse. On land, its glaciers are retreating, and there is a growing area that is clear of snow and ice. Scientists now understand that the ice of West Antarctica is more of an ice basin rather than an ice cap, and that the loss of its ice shelves will cause an inexorable draining of that basin as huge cliffs of ice move towards the sea and break off. There would have to be a substantial reduction in the temperatures of West Antarctica to have any hope of preventing the collapse of its remaining ice shelves and stemming the movement of its ice cap toward the sea. Such a reduction could be possible over an extended time period if the world can quickly stop the discharge of greenhouse gases and contain the post-industrial temperature increase below the manageable level that was agreed at the Paris Climate Conference in December 2015. While weather systems helps to raise the temperature of West Antarctica, the air temperature records of East Antarctica have held steady or even decreased in some places on the ice cap. This is because the East Antarctica ice cap creates its own climate, with its cold winds keeping warmer air from the Southern Ocean at bay, and the circumpolar current keeping the Southern Ocean's warmer surface water away from the continent. The temperature records help to reassure scientists that East Antarctica might not mimic the experiences in West Antarctica and Greenland. Until recently, the nature of East Antarctica and the heavier snowfalls that have been recorded on the ice cap in recent decades led scientists to believe that it was accumulating more ice on the ice cap than it was losing from the thinning ice shelves around the coastline. While there is still much for scientists to learn about the complex relationships among the ice cap, the ice shelves, and the ocean currents of East Antarctica, it has recently become clear that East Antarctica will not be immune to the influence of global warming. The annual measurement of the surface area of the ice shelves in East Antarctica gave a misleading impression that the shelves were withstanding the effects of the warming water temperature, with the cold circumpolar current supposedly keeping the warmer water away from East Antarctica. However, recent measurements have revealed that the ice shelves are being melted from below by warming currents in the deep ocean that manage to flow beneath the circumpolar current. Meanwhile, meltwater lakes and craters have been observed on the surface of at least one ice shelf, with a waterfall sending water cascading through the crater into the ocean below. As they melt from above and are eroded from below, some of the ice shelves of East Antarctica are proving to be just as prone to collapse as the ice shelves of West Antarctica and Greenland, whereupon they will release their breaking influence on the glaciers that feed them. As the glaciers speed up, they will cause a thinning of the ice cap behind them and a great dumping of water into the Southern Ocean. The thinning of the ice cap and the discharge of water into the ocean is also occurring directly from the surface of the ice cap, as meltwater flows from deep inland to the coast. When the water pools on the surface of ice shelves, it increases their melting and hastens their slow disintegration. This phenomenon has been observed in Greenland but was not believed to occur in Antarctica. However, recent studies of aerial photographs and satellite images have revealed pools of meltwater, not only on ice shelves, but on the ice cap, at heights of more than 1,000 meters. In the summer, rivers of meltwater can be seen flowing toward the ocean. This alarming development has to be incorporated into the new computer models before scientists can understand the full implications for the rate of the future sea level rise. What is clear is that it adds urgency to the need to cut back on the discharge of greenhouse gases until the world is no longer exacerbating the pace of global warming. The protection of the future of the Antarctic. There are 3 agreements that are designed to protect marine life in the seas around Antarctica. The first one to be concluded was the Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Seals, CCAS, which was signed in 1972 by 17 signatories to the 1959 Antarctic Treaty. Rather than declaring an outright ban on the killing of seals, the CCAS provided for their killing in a sustainable manner and without harming the overall ecology of the Antarctic region. In fact, no exploitation of the seal population occurred under the convention, other than the sampling of small numbers of seals by scientists for research purposes. Other forms of marine life are protected by the second agreement, the Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, CCEMLR, which was drawn up at a conference in Canberra in 1980. 24 nations and the European Union are now parties to the CCAMLR. Like the CCAS, it was not designed to ban the harvesting of marine life, but rather to provide a legal framework that would ensure these practices were done according to the best scientific advice. The CCAMLR was agreed after concern about the possible overexploitation of krill. Similar concerns were expressed about the possible overexploitation of fish and squid. The CCAMLR established a commission based in Hobart that would set limits to any harvesting, advise on its likely impacts, and initiate an inspection regime to oversee fishing operations in Antarctic waters. The CCAMLR has also created Marine Protected Areas, MPAs, in the Southern Ocean, in which all fishing is banned. The first such MPA was declared in 2009 and covered 94,000 square kilometers off the South Orkney Islands, while a second protected area was declared in 2016 and covered 1,550,000 square kilometers of the resource-rich Ross Sea. Most of the area is to be completely free of fishing, even for scientific purposes, while 28% of the area is available only for scientific research. The Commission also introduced measures to minimize the killing of seabirds as an accidental byproduct of fishing operations and ensure that fishing boats used methods that minimized the amount of unwanted bycatch that was caught in nets, particularly through the bottom trawling of the seabed. Because of the research undertaken by the CCAMLR Scientific Committee, limits were set for the annual amount of krill that could be harvested in various parts of the Southern Ocean. Total bans were imposed on the catching of Patagonian and Antarctic toothfish, which are vulnerable to overfishing because of the long time it takes for them to reach maturity. The toothfish have come under intense pressure from commercial fishing, since they are highly prized by upmarket restaurants and are slow to reproduce. Although CCAMLR inspectors were given authority to board suspicious fishing boats, they had to find them and rely upon the captains of those fishing boats to respect their authority. There was usually too much at stake for the pirates to do so. Although pirate boats have been sunk or seized, it was estimated at the time of writing that there are still at least 7 pirate boats operating in contravention of the convention. The Commission has responded with measures to supervise the trade in complying fish from point of catching to the point of final sale, which then allows non-complying fish to be identified and seized. Yet, the illegal fishing goes on. What are your thoughts on the mysteries of the ice wall of Antarctica? Do you think humans will destroy this beautiful LCE landscape? Share your opinions in the comments section. Don't forget to like, follow, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click on the next video on your screen. You will enjoy it.